So, actually, using the word quote unquote Hollywood as the overall branding of the entertainment industry is a little bit quaint and almost outdated because the entertainment industry, as we think about it, is neither controlled solely by the traditional movie studios that are based in Los Angeles, in Hollywood. And in fact, some of them are owned by corporations not even based in Hollywood. And more important, the power and money has shifted from the traditional centers in Hollywood to other places, principally Silicon Valley. Think Netflix or Amazon. A lot of that then plays out for us as consumers, but mainly I always like to think of these changes in the following way. What does this mean for workers? And huge changes in any industry always mean huge changes for workers. And I'm sorry to say, the changes in this day usually are bad for workers, mainly because of the weakness of the labor movement. Unions, as I say always on this show, and I hope my audience repeats this everywhere you go, unions are the only way workers have a voice and some leverage against corporate power, especially the Jeff Bezos philosophy of the world, which can be summarized, quote, let me become as rich as I can and fight unions tooth and nail because I don't give a shit about workers other than to use them as a tool to make me more money. That's the best way to sum it up, really. Now, you may know this. Most performers in the entertainment business are not snagging a multi-million-dollar deal per picture. That's always been true. The vast majority of performers have always made a living, either a solid middle class living or sometimes somewhat less than that, from residuals, which are basically payments on top of the original picture fee. And sometimes that's a flat fee or more likely a weekly rate. Over many decades, residuals have been tied to various things, like repeat showings of a movie in syndication or sales of DVDs. Now, today, it's all moving to streaming, which for us as consumers means, hey, this is pretty nice. We can watch basically the things we want at the times we choose, not when a company wants us to watch, like the good old days. I actually do remember the good old days. For performers, this is a huge change. And this is a fight for sure for performers into the future, for the generations to come, some not even born today. The question is, will they be able to earn a respectable living? And how will performers get paid in a streaming world? The entertainment industry also has had to grapple with another shift. That would be the reckoning demanded by the Me Too movement. Now, Harvey Weinstein is singularly a disgusting human being, but think of him as the Donald Trump of the entertainment world, a uniquely abhorrent person who just exposes conduct that is much more widespread and common. It isn't just the infamous casting couch. Think of it, because I'm sure you've watched a movie where this would come up. For decades, actors have had to perform nude scenes or very intimate interactions in front of a camera in full view of scores of people on a set, even if the actor felt uncomfortable doing so, because to object to the substance of a scene or to alert a production company to inappropriate behavior during such a scene, or the before and after snickerings of crew members who harass a less than fully clothed actor, that's kind of scary because all of a sudden you're the person making a stink. You don't want the production to move forward because you feel uncomfortable. The big silver lining here is that performers have a union, SAG-AFTRA, which still has a big chunk of leverage inside the entertainment industry. Now, you just can't shoot a film or do a television series without a SAG-AFTRA contract. Now, to be sure, there are non-union companies that have been eating away at the jurisdiction that SAG-AFTRA covers over many decades, actually. But the SAG-AFTRA contract and place in the industry is still quite strong. And in the midst of the pandemic, the union just recently notched a very strong multi-million dollar deal with the main entertainment industry employer association on both streaming rights and protections for performers working in intimate scenes, along with other improvements that are in the contract. It's pretty cool then to have on the show two giants of SAG-AFTRA. The union's president, Gabrielle Carteris, who has a long career in film as an actor, in film, TV, and stage, most prominently in Beverly Hills 90210, and as a producer. And we also have with us Ray Rodriguez, SAG-AFTRA's chief contracts officer. The most extraordinary thing to me, Gabby and Ray, is that here you are in the midst of this pandemic where your industry has essentially shut down, with some exceptions. As you well know, your broadcasters have been working. There's been some work in commercials. There's some sprouts that you see here and there of productions starting to gear up. And you guys have been working very heavily on the whole question of reopening safely. And still, you're able to negotiate a major contract and all this craziness that's going on in the world. And it's really a path breaking contract in two aspects, which I wanted to bring you on the show to talk about because I think my audience is will be interested in these two aspects. And the first thing I think we want to give people a little background to is the question of residuals and how important. And I'll start with Gabby as the working actor. How important, going back for decades, has that been to a an actor's livelihood, especially those who are trying to essentially make a middle class living?
Well, first of all, it's important for all of us who are actors working. It's really it's our you have to look at it as our pay, right? It's we not only get paid for our sessions, which are really important, or the shoot days, but the idea that as a show in success, as it is airing, we also get the benefit of being paid for that continuously. And that's really important because as actors, we work from job to job. So in between those times when we're waiting for that next job, we need to have some kind of income
Mm,
coming in. And for me, it's been a life changer. There are periods of time when I was working nonstop, and those times that I had the lull of actually being able to go and maybe be on a set to work, but I'm still receiving payments for jobs that I've done that are still being shown. And that allows me to make actually more of this, not as a hobby, but as a career where I can really support my family. And that's for all actors aspire to be able to have at least to make that living. Even the celebrities started
mhm.
off in that place where you're just looking job to job. And even when people, it looks like they might be doing very well, you don't know what their challenges are. But we all need to be able to ultimately, again, thrive instead of just barely survive. And that's what residuals do for us.
And is there some way of quantifying the amount of residuals that actors get, or either perhaps a percentage, Ray or Gabby, about the percentage that it means to the average actor? And I know that's kind of a broad category. How do we quantify that for my audience?
I think that it's going to vary somewhat from contract to contract, but broadly speaking, you can think of it as being on the order of half.
Hmm.
About half your pay will ultimately come in the form of residuals. So it is extremely significant. There are contracts where it's even more than half.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean it's half your pay, and as Gabrielle is saying, it's the half that you get when you're not actively working on set, and it enables you as a professional performer to survive between jobs.
And it also allows you to really hone your craft. So when, let's say if I'm not on a set, but I'm getting residuals as a result of the fact that I was working, I can do my auditions. I can go and pay for my transportation to the audition, or if I have wardrobe issues, whatever. But all those things that I have to do to prepare, it's not like you just get a job. You have to do certain things, take classes. So that's what residuals are. It's an unconventional way of working. People aren't necessarily familiar with it
Hmm.
because a lot of people go to an office or they have a job that has designated amount of time and it's on a regular basis. But we're freelancers in a lot of ways, and that's just it's not the way it is. So this is it's a very very important piece of our income.
Yes. And so now, what happened in this contract is quite exciting in terms of the way the industry is evolving and what you have done. And I almost analogize this, and you must feel excited about this, being present to actually work on this, because what you're doing, and we're going to talk about this, is you're really looking forward to the future for generations to come, for performers who might not even be born today, because the industry is evolving. And I think of the history of the Screen Actors Guild going back to when it was formed, and then at the time when the VCR came along, and there were always these chapters where the leadership at that moment had to think 20, 30 years ahead. And so, and my audience knows what's happening as consumers of Netflix, of consumers of streaming
Amazon, Disney
services,
Plus, right?
you go
All of
down
it.
the list. Tell us a little bit about how that industry is evolving and then, of course, how that affects how you think about your income. Go ahead, Gabby, and then we'll ask Ray.
W Well, first of all, it's so interesting to be in the pandemic of COVID-19 during a negotiation. So that in itself, Ray is a champion. I'm telling you, as a negotiator, he's amazing. I say it all the time. I always want everybody to know because he really is able to actualize and hear what we want as members. He and David White are a very good team. But that being said, we're in it's to do a negotiation. I think I've been in over 20, and God knows Ray must have been over 55 million if that's the case. But to never have I been in a negotiation where we've done it by Zoom. But what was really incredible was that to do a negotiation during COVID actually exemplified or magnified the situation we're in. Everybody was shuttered in home. The first thing they were told was, well, go and watch all the Netflix shows that you missed. This is a great time to binge. And it actually magnified what we were talking about as the future, but it is the present. Everybody's watched every Amazon show there is, Netflix show, what's coming out on every streaming platform is being viewed from this last 6 months that we've been in the pandemic. And I don't know how much longer we're going to go, but it actually, the path of what we said was the future became an instant presence. And this negotiation dealt with exactly how we're watching and consuming product right now, and it does speak to the future because we know that the antiquated way of appointment television, that 7 o'clock Wednesday night, that's kind of
Gone.
shifting
Really?
totally, right? People aren't even, it's one screen covers all platforms, and you want to watch it in bed with your family, in the living room with your family, in the park with your whatever it is. It's a new age, and this negotiation during this COVID period, getting the kind of residual increase that we got for streaming, which was a 26 to 45% increase, is amazing because it really is. If you talk about the wave, we are not behind the wave, we are on top of the wave. This was, I think, one of the most exciting negotiations, and what it means for our members is tremendous.
And let's underscore, and then I'll turn to Ray to comment on this. I just happened to notice Disney reporting its revenue results. And even in the pandemic, it didn't do as well as it perhaps wanted to, partly because part of its revenue comes from theme parks, which are
Parks, right?
obviously shut down. But in the its third quarter, fiscal quarter, brought in $11.78 billion in revenue. And to your point, Gabby, 100 million subscribers to Disney Plus and its other streaming services, and it announced a new streaming service. And I'm using Disney because everybody knows what Disney is, but Ray, I think it reflects what's happening in the industry, right?
Absolutely. All of the major studios and their new Silicon Valley competitors who have entered into the industry as well have been prioritizing shifting to this subscription streaming model. Not only do the consumers like it, but it creates the opportunity for the studio to control the whole chain of production. They are not doing business now with third party exhibitors where they're producing content and then licensing it to some other network, some other basic cable network, some other theater chain, some other company that then does the job of actually delivering the content to the consumer. It's now seamless. It goes all the way from the C suite at pick your favorite studio, Disney, and all the way to the screen. It's the same company now that gets to control that the entire path. And
Mm,
so it enables not only for the studios to reach consumers in a way that consumers find convenient and have responded positively to, but in a way that lets them keep the profit from every link in the distribution chain for themselves.
mhm.
So it's extremely attractive to the studios. And as you've been seeing with HBO Max, Peacock, you name it, every single studio now is investing heavily in their own subscription streaming platform and moving to an environment where that is the preferred destination for their content because that's where they can monetize it the most effectively.
Hmm.
And we started to recognize those shifts. I mean, we've been watching them for a while, but the last negotiation coming from that time to this period, there was a whole education for our members that came from David White and Ray and the staff talking about, the walled-in garden aspect. What Ray is speaking of is that Disney took its material away from outlets like Netflix and said, we're just going to have it ourselves, our
Mhm.
own walled-in garden. And that's what we're seeing everywhere. That's why that's also very significant to why it's important that we captured the residual stream the way we did this time around.
And was the Netflix deal that you made separately for streaming, was that kind of the model and the basis, your first big victory on streaming that you then applied here in this big negotiation with the other studios? More or less.
Yeah.
It's a little bit different in that Netflix, the agreement that we had with Netflix, didn't actually address the residual formula.
Mm,
That was really much more about Netflix shifting into the role of producing for itself, which
mm,
is the direction that company has been taking. Gabrielle just referenced the fact that Disney and the other studios, because they're recognizing that they created a monster that they now have to compete with, have been pulling their content away from Netflix and putting it onto their own platforms. The flip side of that is Netflix now has to fill their platform with content that they produce for themselves.
mm.
And as they shifted into that role of self producing more and more, they needed to have a direct relationship with the union. I mean, they had been operating basically as an exhibition platform and having third party producers make their content. But they are now filling in the other half of what studios have been doing. Studios have been producing the content, and now they're developing the platforms to show it for themselves.
Mhm.
Netflix had been the platform showing content from everyone, and now they're having to fill in the other side of that role and actually increasingly produce for themselves. So it was a different focus, but it definitely is responsive to the same overall trajectory of where the industry is
Producers.
going. Where, as Gabrielle said, it's walled gardens. Netflix is going to produce for Netflix. Disney is going to produce for Disney. And that was really the significance of the Netflix deal.
And although we're in a pandemic and we shouldn't make humorous asides or it's not a funny time, I do have to say that I can't tell you how many people I've talked to, friends of mine, who say this pandemic has to be over already because we're running out of things to
Of Netflix.
watch. I've already watched everything I want to watch on Netflix. And,
And that's why
it's like
we've been
people.
working on a safer way to go back to sets, right? We recognize that the audience needs it. And so we are doing everything we can to make sure everybody goes back to work. So
And I know
very,
we all know it's a serious time, but
it is.
there is, humor in our lives that we have to remember that. And people are, as I said, tearing out their hair, whatever hair I have left, about running out of content. Now,
Yeah.
the contract was passed by overwhelming margin by 75%, which is a huge support for the negotiators, for the leadership, because people are excited about it. And so does the average performer when they are now moving forward into a streaming situation. If we can explain it in layperson's term, how much do they make off of this? Does it come out of how many times it's streamed? Is it a big pot of money that's divided? Explain it in the easiest way possible for a late audience.
I'll let Ray do that one.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's basically how long it's available on the platform. So you do your work. 90 days later, you get your first residual becomes due. It's due at the end of that quarter, and then you get a residual payment every year. And the formula looks at how much you made
Mm,
for your work on that show, and it looks at the size of the platform and how long it's been exhibited. So it's a declining scale where each year of availability, the payment goes down a bit because you figure the audience, most of the audience is watching right after it comes out. And then as the years go by, it's not going to attract the same size of audience generally. So that's what it is. It's an annual payment. It's based on the fact that your program is available on the platform over the course of that year. And the formula looks at what you made and how long that program has been available, and then the size of the platform you're on. If you're on a bigger platform, obviously the payment is higher.
And that's the change that you're seeing that we're seeing within the industry. That's a very important formula that Ray is talking about because traditionally it was how many eyes, right? Nielsen's
right.
based on how many eyes, how many households are watching. This is a matter of time. So that allows for as the screens change and the way, that people, all the different ways that people might view, we're really coming to a place. It doesn't matter ultimately how you view it. It's the fact that it still lives. And as
Mhm.
long as it lives, you get paid, which is actually, that's really forward thinking compared to historically how we used to do things.
Hmm. Really interesting. Okay, so I want to transition now to the second topic that I think my audience is quite interested in. The pandemic, in some way, has wiped away our memory of everything that was going on before because we're in the grips of this crisis, this national pandemic. But within the last couple of years, there's been a huge uprising by women around the Me Too movement, around sexual harassment. If I can use the term, the Harvey Weinsteining of the country, and Harvey Weinstein being the most
Agreed.
disgusting example, an egregious example of a human being who abused women repeatedly. But, and Gabby, you know this because you've been in the industry for a long time. This has been really rife for years and decades and not really spoken about. And what you all did is you tried to address this, and you've addressed this before, but actually in the negotiation, the contract, you've actually put in place hard and fast rules about protecting mostly women, but I assume this applies
This is
somewhat
anybody,
to,
anybody who's in a hyper-exposed work where they have to do
yeah.
nudity or sexually explicit or just hyper-exposed work. They are protected.
So explain kind of the evolution of this and what the importance of this is.
Well, first of all, when you say, this has been going on within our industry, this is endemic in society and
Mm,
on a global level. So, the idea that what sexual assault and that vulnerability that people have with people who are in power taking advantage. And so the Harvey Weinstein moment for all of us was like, oh my God. First of all, it magnified a lot of what people are feeling or experiencing, except it was just so extreme that it threw people out into the universe to start talking about it. One person said it, and then another person said, oh my God, I'm not alone. That happened to me too. You're not alone. You're not alone. And it created this mushroom. We've gone through periods of time where we've had the mushroom. We realized after the Harvey Weinstein moment, we didn't want it to be just a moment, but a movement. So this has been a real movement these last couple of years, and this contract I actually think speaks to the movement itself. The language that we got in this contract, a lot of this was derived from members from
mm,
around the country talking about these are the things that we experience when we go on set when we how do we help you need to help us feel empowered and not so vulnerable that when we go to we don't want to lose the job. We're stuck in a situation when we come on set and suddenly they throw upon us, you know what, just take your clothes off here, or you know what, just so what if he touches you there, it's not a big deal. And this feeling of diminished sense of self that
mm,
you don't want to lose the job, you want to be a team player, this isn't really what you signed up for, but now you don't feel like you have a voice. So this contract, what's gone on, I think it really expresses it's about empowerment. So the idea that we put 48 hours notice prior to going to a set to know exactly what it is you're going to do, to be able to have the script, the sides, the scenes that you're working on, so you can see what is this explicit work I'm going to do. You sign something to say, yes, this is acceptable. We all know what I'm going to be doing. I know what I'm going to be doing. And then when you go to set, you can't just have it changed. Again, you're empowering the performer to say, wait a minute, this is what I agreed on. I did not agree on this. I'm not comfortable on this. We want them to feel empowered instead of feeling so vulnerable that they've lost their voice. So that was one of the things that we dealt with. We talked about dignity on set, the ability for, you know, performers, whether they're, all the way from background to the, series regular, the idea that when you're standing on set and you're naked or you're hyper exposed, that you should be able to have a cover up in between,
mm.
shots. There are people literally, Jonathan, if I tell you, they tell us stories where they were left there naked saying, you know what, we'll get to you, we'll get to you. It's okay. You don't need a cover up. It's going to take up time. Unacceptable. Like this is like nobody wants to be left out there like that. So this language that we put in the contract again empowers the performer to feel dignity when they're doing their work. And there's several different things that we got into this contract language that I think is really important stepping stones for
Mhm.
giving people the ability to have a voice. And again, to remember, that you have a right. You have a right.
Right. And I assume it then is not just about, and this is obviously important. It's not just about the individual performer being able to say stop and having the ability to do that, but also it probably creates then a different environment on the set.
It
So,
does.
for example, a performer will get covered, but also it sends the message to all the crew, and certainly men, but all the crew, that you can't treat someone with disrespect or
Right.
harass them.
Right. You can't just go and pull your phone out and take a picture
Yeah.
and send it around to your buddies. Unacceptable.
Yeah.
You can't, don't demean the individual because you think this is a fun, cute moment. This is serious. It
Mhm.
takes a lot. We want to make sure that everybody understands there's boundaries. We should have a closed set. We want people to work with comfort. And I do think it gives relief to the crews. There are crew members who've said to us, thank you, because it's so uncomfortable. I was on a set and I didn't know what to say.
Mm.
We're actually helping to empower everybody with this language.
And Ray, I'm curious, at the negotiating table, what was the dynamic around this issue? Was it simply the CEOs or whoever you were negotiating with? Were they simply dealing with this because they saw the potential legal liabilities if in this environment of being sued, or did they actually get it? Did they actually understand what was going on in society? What was the dynamic there?
Yeah, I mean, so it was an interesting dynamic because I am convinced that the negotiators that we were dealing with actually, at an individual level, they did get it. The chief negotiator for the AMPTP and her sort of second in command there are both women, and I think they did understand it, but they were working on behalf of companies that are, these are increasingly bottom line oriented companies that are part of massive conglomerates, that everything gets put through an Excel spreadsheet. And, they're very loath to want to bring a deal back to their superiors that are going to impose a bunch of
Mm,
new obligations that are going to slow down their production. And so, while at the same time you're getting this sense from the negotiators that they're personally sympathetic, it is a fight for every single inch of protections that you're able to add to the contract. It's a slog. I mean, this is not a circumstance where you're being met with, yeah, that sounds reasonable, and suddenly you get to a deal. This took the entire negotiation. This issue didn't get resolved until the very end. In fact, the last piece of the deal to move so that we could close was one of the aspects that was in play in this area of nudity and sex acts, and that was extending the requirement of cover-ups to background actors, because we were being told no on that. They'd finally gotten to the point where they said, okay, yeah, if there's a pause in filming, we'll bring a bathrobe or another cover up to the principal performer, but they wouldn't make the same commitment for someone who is engaged under a background contract. Like, that means you have any less dignity as a human being because you're being engaged as a background actor. It's just a form of contractual engagement. And so, it was a strange dynamic in that
mm.
regard, because I did feel like I was dealing with people who understood it and who were naturally sympathetic to it, but who were being accountable to companies that have a very dollars and cents and bottom line driven view on near every issue, including this one. So it was a real fight to get these protections. And as much as we have accomplished in this contract, and look, we took a provision that was half a page in the collective bargaining agreement dealing with nudity and sex acts, and turned it into several pages with more than a dozen new protections for performers. I mean, it was a radical rewrite and overhaul and improvement of this section. But even at that, it doesn't end with the contract. The
Mm.
advocacy has to continue into the enforcement, into the culture setting on set, into so many other, legislative activity. This is an
Education. Yeah.
education. You have to attack this from 360 degrees.
Mm.
And I think we have to be realistic and know that we have to set our expectations that this is going to be resisted.
Mm.
As righteous as I think this is one of these issues where nobody is going to argue with the righteousness of what we're trying to do. And yet you have to understand, and people have to understand, this is an inch by inch fight in negotiations and out of negotiations too.
Okay, so, in closing, let me just go back to where I started. It's really incredible what you both have done, and not just you two. I know you've worked with huge teams of people, leadership, staff, that in the midst of this pandemic, you've really set some incredible, really high bars and new standards, both on the level of what people are going to earn in terms of streamings and to give people the dignity and respect when they go to work.
You make it sound look, it's been a long, hard drive. So when you're saying that, Jonathan, it's so nice to hear. But I have to say, for my part, the members have been tremendously important in this process. We have the Blue Ribbon Commission on Safety, but we also have members from around the country who've been talking, working with working with individuals outside of art, of being actors, but with directors and producers, really talking about this. It has been, and just throughout the industry, working with so many people has been so interesting and so fulfilling. And it speaks about people really wanting to see cultural change. I
Mm.
mean, it takes all of that. But with all of that and all the members who've been involved, I have to say again, our staff, who really not only heard it but digested it and is able to actually on our behalf be able to speak on this, has been really important, because it really is the synergy of the members and the staff when we go through the negotiating process
Mm.
that success happens, I think. And I think there's been it was a good group this time around.
Well, good on both of you. As you both pointed out, there's now the job of making sure this is implemented, that you can actually on the shop floor, if I can use that old industrial term, you make it happen. And we'll have to have you back on the show to talk about how it's going, not to mention how you're doing on reopening the industry. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.
Thank
Yay.
you. Thanks for
Thanks,
having us.
Jonathan.